everyone. I'm Tiffany Eddy.
And I'm Tom Praisall.
And we are so pleased to have you join us for our latest episode of
Anything But Politics.
And today we have the pleasure of being joined by
Senator Sue Prentiss. So I don't know if you saw that there was a bat signal in the sky, but we have a real hero that has arrived amongst our midst. And Senator Sue Prentiss, two-term state senator, serving, I know you're from Lebanon, but that whole Lakes, Upper Valley region.
River Valley.
And Senator Prentiss has served on a number of committees during her tenure in the Senate, including Executive Departments and Administration, Education, Health and Human Services, Transportation, really delving into a lot of different subject areas, but she certainly comes with a great amount of expertise given her role and her experience. So Senator Prentiss is the current executive director of the American Trauma Society. She has spent her life working in EMS. I believe you were the first female EMS director in the state of New Hampshire. She is a paramedic. She is a medical examiner. Former medical examiner.
Wow.
Just a whole host. I believe you even worked for the federal government under Secretary Buttigieg in the National Highway Safety Administration.
Secretary Buttigieg appointed me to the National EMS Advisory Council it was a 4-year term, and so the term is officially up in April. So I got to spend the last 4 years working on this council that sets strategic direction and provides advice to the Federal Interagency Emergency Medical Services Committee. So that's where Homeland Security, emergency management, emergency medicine, EMS, they all come together. And at the National EMS Advisory Council, we're just specifically focused on the world of pre-hospital medicine.
That's
Wow,
awesome.
that's fascinating.
Well, so first of all, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And I wanted to start right at the beginning. So you grew up in Massachusetts, right?
I did.
Near Kowloon?
Dear Colleen.
Oh my gosh, Cal, are you serious?
Yeah.
I've just been there that's like the most amazing place ever.
Totally. I grew up in Peabody, Mass, one
Yeah.
of 6. So there's 3 girls and 3 boys in my family, and we thought we were the Brady Bunch.
Yeah.
Especially since I have a brother named Peter, and he was stuck right in the middle. So there's 6 of us. We grew up on Butternut Ave. Pretty much all went to Catholic schools, and when we were in high school, you're starting to find your freedom back in the day when your parents were like, you can all get in a car and go out together, and probably none of us had seatbelts on, which I would not advise, and I haven't thought about since then. We would go to Kowloon. It was great. Chinese food, Saugus, Mass. The place is famous. Now, don't they have an outpost in Seabrook, New Hampshire now?
I believe that is
believe
correct
they
at the
do,
Brook.
Yeah, so it is. It's famous. Whenever I see the Kowloon, there's the building itself. People will use that and put it up on Facebook. I was at Kowloon tonight. It takes me back to all those really high school memories.
Any favorite ones from Calhoun
Well,
that you can talk about?
so I will say that even though when we were in high school, I did break the law and drink under the age of, then it was 18, eventually 21. That usually did not involve time at Kowloon. Time at Kowloon was this group of girls, many of which I'm still in touch with, who stayed in Massachusetts and brought up their families there. With the exception of, I have a stepsister, Sarah, is one of our 6, and she and I are the same age. And we have different last names. So everybody thought we were like best friends, but we're actually sisters. And we all still... That's what we would do. We'd go to Kowloon. We would go to the Leaning Tower of Pizza. We'd go into Faneuil Hall. Places that, when my daughter Phoebe was in high school, I wouldn't think about letting her go to because the world has changed in a way where,
Sure.
I think, she might have been a little more vulnerable. But so we didn't do anything that was illegal or uncalled for at Kowloon, except enjoy some some fried rice.
And they have great fried rice. Last time you were there?
It was 80.
Oh, so it's been a while.
83, 84.
We've been planning a trip for a while now.
We should just do a group trip down to Calhoun.
Yeah.
We'll have a convention.
We're going to get a party bus,
Okay.
or we're going to get a driver. Okay, so we have to figure out how
I
many
nominate Jim
people.
Demers.
We'll have Jim Demers be the driver, just so that everybody can relax. And there's this deadline looming because Kowloon is in a spot on Route 1 in Saugus that is like prime real estate for housing because it is like a main way into the city of Boston. And the family of those that own Kowloon are not sure, they're really struggling with keeping the family business going. Like it's, as I've understood this from reading about it, it's always like in the newspaper, being talked about on the news, but they're not sure they want to keep it going. So they've been talking about selling the land so that it can be developed into, apartments and housing. Yeah. And then there's a thought about maybe it would be like a half and half, so there would be like a mini Kowloon.
Can you imagine living above a Kowloon?
I can't imagine.
But you could live next door to it. But living above it, I think, would be different. And especially since, it's got a dinky roof like this. No.
It's like very Harry Potter-esque.
Yes, it's anybody. I recently, so through the American Trauma Society, I work with trauma surgeons from all over the country. And there's this one from Johns Hopkins, Elliot Holt. And we're, friends on Facebook. But, I know Elliot pretty well. And I saw around Christmas time, it popped up into my feed that he was at Kowloon. Now, he lives in Baltimore, but his wife grew up in the greater Boston area, and every year at Christmas time, they would do a family trip to Kowloon. So I'm like, oh my gosh, Elliot, like, that's a place. You're 7 miles from where I grew up as a child, and that's a place we used to go all the time. So I thought that was pretty interesting to see what a small world that was, or it is.
That's fascinating. So and it's such a beloved place. It's like somewhere whenever I get off, land into Logan and come back into New Hampshire on the way, it's always like that special stop to just like go in, pop in and grab something to eat and drink and then, head on home. But I'm curious, so how did you go from Massachusetts to then winding up in the Connecticut River Valley up in New Hampshire? Like what brought you up here?
It was college.
Purple Knights.
Purple Knights, St. Michael's College. You got to love it. So when I was, the family of 6, every Saturday night.
You're still young.
Yes, I am. There was a television show on every Saturday night at 8 o'clock, Emergency, with Johnny and Roy.
Oh my gosh.
Dun, dun, dun.
Love that.
And we were fixated as kids, and I would watch this and say, and I was part of a generation that grew up saying, when I grow up, I'm going to be a paramedic. And there's so many people I know in the business that's where they started. Now there are newer entrants to the business when you say, oh, do you know about Squad 51 or Johnny and Roy? They're like, ooh. But every Saturday night we heard those tones and we watched that show. So when I was in high school and I couldn't decide, that group of girlfriends I was talking about and my sister, they were all like, one of my sisters went to St. Anselm's, and actually one of her roommates while she was at St. A's was Senator D'Alessandro's niece, Lisa. So I got to know her before I was ever even here. But where everybody was picking their colleges, and I couldn't figure out really what I wanted to do. And in the back of my mind, there was this medicine thing, and I did some athletic training. And so Sister Milberger said to my mother.
Sister Milberger.
Sister Milberger.
Okay.
She was the guidance counselor. She said, there's a college in Vermont. They have an ambulance service. Let's get her up there. Let's see if she likes it. That's where she should go. So that's what ended up happening. I went to St. Michael's. That's where I graduated from. And while I was there, I took my EMT course. So it would be 82. I graduated in 86. I took an EMT course like in 1984 and, started volunteering on this ambulance service that answered emergency calls for 4 communities. So we didn't just handle the campus. We were going out to places like Heinsberg, Vermont, Winooski. Winooski was the town, little town that we were in, and then backing up. Even I remember going on, ambulance calls in the city of Burlington. So that's what happened. I started working as an EMT, and that was I really loved that work, but it wasn't a full-time job. It was always volunteer. So I stayed there. I did work. I worked for a United States Senator in constituent services. I worked for a member of the House. Who lost his seat to Bernie Sanders in constituent services. And I did a little work in public relations. And while I was working at this PR firm, my boss said to me, hey, I saw this job in the paper this weekend. Please don't think we want you to leave. But they're looking for somebody at Dartmouth College to work on a rural health outreach project that will secure the primary health care safety net, which basically the I don't want to say the hypothesis, but their premise going into this project to the feds to get it funded was in the more rural parts of our states, both in Vermont and New Hampshire, if people don't have cars and they don't have doctors and they have no way to get health care, 3 digits, 911. So that the feds funded a 3-year initiative out of Dartmouth Medical School, and they were looking for someone who had a background working with volunteers, was preferably an EMT, and had done some work in public relations. So that's how I ended up in the Upper Valley. I landed that job, ended up being the project director, ran it for 3 years, and it just launched me into staying in the Upper Valley.
That's awesome. I did not know that story at all. I used to live in Winooski, Vermont, too, for a while, so I know that area pretty well. And so you and I probably crossed paths more than we even knew, like crossed paths when you were at the fire academy, right? And maybe even crossed paths back in Vermont like 30 years ago.
So have you seen the downtown of Winooski now?
No, not for many years.
Okay, so I had an office when I worked for, and he has since retired. It was brief, but it was a great foot in the door. The former U.S. Senator Stafford, he had an office on the top floor of the Champlain Mill.
Oh, wow.
Okay, back
Yep.
the old waterworks, the mill, and that whole big parking lot. That's now all developed. It's all apartments. That whole downtown has changed. And my daughter went to St. Michael's, so I was able to go up and, visit her and kind of then you like revisit your heyday somewhat, except, there's a lot more housing up there now.
So, my brother went to St. Michael's, and he was 6 years older than me, and he loved it. He was a biology major, and he loved it up there, and I would always go visit him and with my family, and that was my first time on a college campus, and I was like, oh, this place is great. This place is cool. He's having a great time. He really loves it. But I'd always followed in my brother's footsteps. And so when I went to a college fair in high school, I went up to the St. Michael's table and I said, hey, I really love your college. They're like, oh, great, here's a pamphlet. I'm like, so when people apply here, where else do they apply? And they said St. A's. And I ended up at St. A's.
So there's a lot that's the same about those schools, except St. Mike's is co-ed. And the drinking age was 18. So when you're in college then, it was a lot of fun.
That's a big deal.
Yeah. And then, so my sister went to St. A's with
Yep.
a number of my girlfriends from high school. So it was just interesting to see how it was St. A's, St. Mike's, St. Lawrence.
Yep.
And then there was a crew that went up to Colby in northern Maine. So a lot of us kind of stayed in this, in the New England circle, but the Catholic school influence, played over into our college careers.
Yeah. So you moved, so you went to St. Michael's, and then you went to work at Dartmouth.
Yep.
And what was that, around 92?
92. Very good.
Yeah, I do my homework every once in a while. Don't tell my high school teachers. But so you moved to Lebanon in 92 and put down your roots. And at what point did you make EMS like a full-time gig?
EMS became a full-time gig when I took that job at Dartmouth Medical School. So all the time that I was doing it in Vermont, I was doing it as a volunteer, which was, I wouldn't change it for the world. It was just tremendous experience, made friends for life. I learned so much about, the good side of humanity, dealing with tough situations as well as working with a lot of really good people. But when I got the opportunity to go to Dartmouth Medical School and work on that project, it changed my life in a number of ways. One thing is I only had to have one job. I always was working a couple jobs. I mean, I bagged groceries until I was a side hustle until I came to the medical school. But it was the pay and benefits were strong for that period of time. And I was able to, bring my EMT across the border and start to and I actually moved to Enfield, so I started volunteering there.
Okay.
So really the time at coming to the medical school is where I was able to focus more on emergency medical services.
So, and I mean this with all due respect, but you were like a hustler. And I say that because I relate to that, where you were out doing all sorts of different jobs. Some of it because you wanted to, but you were getting things done and really working hard to kind of get to where you have, today.
I had this vision, or I don't know if this vision is the right word. I knew that there was more to do and that I could do it. And I had to just keep moving in that direction. Like the best way to explain it is that, I loved working in emergency medical services, but where I was living at that point, even though the experience was great, you couldn't make a career out of it. And the first night of my EMT class, that's the best way to describe this whole trajectory.
At St. Mike's?
Well, actually, it was at UVM. So the St.
Okay.
Mike's kids went over to UVM. And UVM, University of Vermont, they had an ambulance service too. And it's where I met one of my best friends for life. We're still very close. Tara Pacey sat to the left of me. And, for our entirety of that EMT class, which, I still talk to her all the time. And again, made a friend for life. But the very first night of class, Dan Mance, who was the then chief or director of emergency medical services for Vermont, came and he gave a presentation. And I was sitting there listening to him, just like watching that show Emergency. And I said, someday I'm going to have that job. That's what I want to do. I want to run a state system. I want to run a system of care. So I had to back my way into it through a number of different steps along the way, a number of different jobs, but eventually ended up being the chief of emergency medical services. And in New Hampshire, our emergency medical services organization is one of less than 10 in the country now, and then it was 3 that's actually situated at the Department of Safety. Most of these operations are in Health and Human Services. So it was a really unique opportunity to be the first woman that had this role at the Fire Academy, overseeing emergency medical services statewide, and putting on a uniform with a white shirt and a badge every day. But it was that first night of class. I saw okay, that's what I want to do, and so I started working. I learned about his career, I learned about others' careers, and I started working towards jobs, working towards certifications, reading every book I could on leadership and trying to get myself ready to do that job. And I did.
So that was going to be one of my questions, right? You saw it and you wanted it and then you made it happen. But what's the application process like for that? Do you submit an application or is it who you know? How did you get to a position where the Department of Safety, or is it appointed by the governor?
It was
that they pick you.
So it was at that time, and it still remains a classified position in state government. So it did mean I had to apply. My boss, who was the director of fire training and emergency medical services, he was a governor and council appointee. But
Okay.
the 3 bureau chiefs were all classified. So that's fill out an application, go through an interview process. And prior to being the chief, I'd had some time, I call it on the deck, as the state's trauma system coordinator. And that's been part of what brought me to the Trauma Society. It's a mix of both of those things. So I had already been working there. I left for a little while to try something out in New York State. It was a great experience, but I needed to come back home. I felt like the Upper Valley was really my home. Just that extra 3 hours away was, I don't know, it was just like a whole different world. Great people, not for me. So I came back, and the person who had originally had the position was moving on to another career, and so I put my name in and took those years of hustling and put it to work.
So I'm curious, how did you go from that to then being a medical examiner? That seems like that would mean that much more training, or was it a natural progression in your career?
So the medical examiner role, which is outside of working in an emergency department, which I did for 10 years as a paramedic, working as an associate deputy medical examiner was one of the hardest jobs to do, but it also was completely fascinating. And again, the human side of those roles, dealing with people during their worst times, it was, a great honor. And so the system as it was is different than it is now for medical examiners. We were contracted employees with the Department of Justice, and how I came into that was a side hustle. So I was sending my daughter off to college, been a paramedic all of this time, and the woman who had trained me when I went to work in the emergency room up at Spear Memorial Hospital in Plymouth, I'm still really good friends with, she was the chief forensic investigator under Dr. Andrew and now Dr. Duvall. And so she called me up. Every once in a while she'd call me and say, I'm looking for some ADMEs. That's what they would call us. We had
What does ADME stand for?
Associate Deputy Medical Examiner.
Okay.
So you're basically deputized. You take an oath, you're deputized by the Chief Medical Examiner to work in their stead in the field, and there's a whole report into them when you're out there. And
And I'm just curious, like, what does that mean, though? Like, you're an ADME now, or what was it again?
ADME, an Associate Deputy Medical Examiner.
So what are the responsibilities of doing something like that? What are the job responsibilities?
So I just want to back it up and say that there was months and months of training, like classroom training, and this was a part-time contracted gig, a hustle to help put my daughter through college. That's why I decided to do it. And so we finished the training. There's a number of autopsies that you have to attend, and then you go out and you work with someone who's already done the job. So your responsibilities, you're on, there were certain call periods, but what we had to do was if there was an unattended death outside of a healthcare facility, the call, say, let's use some of the most, common things like a motor vehicle crash, and there was somebody who was, say, unfortunately dead on arrival, it would usually rise up through the sheriff's office. I covered mostly Grafton County, a little bit of Sullivan, and they would have, you'd be paged. And law enforcement would say, here's where we are, here's what we have. And you had to make a determination whether it was in your jurisdiction or not.
Okay.
Because not all calls were motor vehicle crashes. There were more than anything else. You would be managing, unattended deaths at home of somebody who had been terminally ill, but there was no one with them at the time. Somebody who, suffered a sudden cardiac arrest in their, passed away in their sleep. So again, there's nobody is with them or knows exactly what happened. So they would make this call. We would decide whether it was in our jurisdiction or not. And then if it was in your jurisdiction, that meant you went to a scene, of a motor vehicle crash, or you went to a hospital where the patient was then, wherever the location, might be. Sometimes these were in people's homes because unfortunately, suicide is an epidemic, and within our jurisdiction would be suicides. And so it was not CSI, it was a medical legal death investigation. So I would just gather the facts around what had happened, and then contact their primary care provider, or if it was at Dartmouth, we were set up in a secure system where we could review their medical records. So you had to piece together, like, how did you get here, and do a report. And so that was my primary responsibility. And then I had to complete the death certificate. Well, it's responsibilities, plural. So I would call whatever pathologist was on. So like a lot of folks know Dr. Duvall. Now we have Dr. Weinberg, whatever pathologist was covering. I was out, like I was deputized to do this work for them. I would call into them and explain where I was, what brought me there, what I had found, what I had seen in their medical record. And then they would say, okay, from talking to you, this is the manner of death, this is the cause of death, and you're going to sign in my place. So I would sign for them, and then that would be the completion of the death certificate.
Well, I mean, and that's kind of heavy duty. Like having been a reporter for many years, back in my previous life, I've only been on a scene with a dead body a couple of times, but it has an impact on you. It's something that you take away. I think you walk away like with a deep appreciation of being here and being alive, and what's at stake in essence. How, like, you've seen exponentially more scenes than I ever have. How does that impact you, and how do you kind of like walk away and move on from something like that? Deep question, I know. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. What I will say is that as I've gotten older, things that never bothered me before, like when you feel like you're young and you're invincible, and now I'm not saying that I'm like really.
Well, you're pretty young.
Yeah, thank you. There were things that didn't bother me until, I was a mother. My daughter Phoebe, she's going to be 28 this year. I have, an elderly mom who lives down the street from me. Just you'd start to make these connections to the people that you were either talking to because you were delivering bad news, as well as interviewing them to get information. And those things now feel very different to me when I leave them. You can put it in its place, but it's not healthy not to think about it and work through it. I certainly saw some things and was part of some really tragic situations that, I can think of one time where I'm not a big crier and I wish I could cry more. It's just, it's not my thing, where I absolutely had a complete, I left the emergency department, spent some time by myself, had a moment, and then I pulled myself together. And I thought that was really healthy because 30-year-old Sue Prentiss wouldn't have done that. Then probably 58, I think I was 58 when in that situation, yeah, I did. So you learn.
And turning the page a little bit, like you've seen, the darker side, unfortunately, but you've also been a lifesaver. So, I mean, Tom alluded to the whole bat call, the bat signal,
the bat sign.
But you've been responsible for being maybe at the right place at the right time, but also having the right skill set and saving lives,
especially around the State House.
So the number one thing that I always try to remember is a paramedic without equipment. It's it's not really a joke. We say, "What's a paramedic without equipment?" First responder. And first. That's so.
Yeah.
The most important thing you have, no matter what, is like these and this, and just the ability. Like I'm saying, like my eyes, and my ears, and my hands, and that all of us do. Like you can have all this fancy equipment, but it doesn't matter when something happens. You just need to know how to initially respond and how to roll the ball. And I've had at least maybe 2 situations, one at a State of the State, and then one when we've been in session where there has been a medical emergency, where someone has either called my name specifically or gotten up and said, "We need a paramedic." And I've looked around, and I remember Senator Sherman, he was sitting behind me. I said, "Well, I guess I better go." And he came with me. And I also there's been some car crashes outside the State House. It happens all the time on that street. And you hear this terrible crash. And you go out and just make sure everything's okay and talk to people and then hand them off to the Concord Fire Department when they get there. So it's something that, I've always done. And I feel like that is, we all have our, there's a calling. There's just something that you're made to do. And that's been it.
Yeah, and you have the skill set that comes with obviously your background to be there and have the tools to act in those situations. And now in your role as the executive director of the American Trauma Society, you are working to implement policies around the country, right?
Correct.
So can you give us some ideas about what are these policies and what type of work goes into drafting and creating these policies?
I'd love to. So what people don't often realize is that trauma is the leading cause of death between the ages of 1 and 34 here in New Hampshire. COVID peaked it for a while in a certain area, but 1 in 44 nationally, 1 in 34 in this state. And the leading mechanism is motor vehicle crashes for death. And then for disability, it's going to be falls. So
what do you define trauma as, right? Because trauma has a whole breadth of possible connotations, and
trauma is physical is physical injury. But it's an interesting question. There are a few exceptions where, like poisoning, you might not think of that as the same as a car crash, but poisoning is the same. It is coded the same way as a trauma is. So that is. That's one of the things that, sometimes stands out. But it's when you think about any type of physical injury, even if it's something ingested, that's trauma.
Okay.
So the work that I've been able to influence is with trauma centers throughout the United States, including some of the trauma centers right here in the state. Not just myself, but we have a team of 5 of us that work from throughout the country to shore up what we call the system of care. Because if this is your leading cause of death, and think about this last year in New Hampshire, motor vehicle crashes.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think it is really, in an unfortunate way, shining the light on the fact that this is a really serious problem. And it's in the youth in particular. We went up by 400% in terms of deaths. But we don't often hear about trauma the way I talk about it. Trauma occupies more hospital beds per day, respectfully, than cancer, heart disease, and AIDS combined. It has a higher cost to society, a higher cost of a loss of productive time in the workforce. I mean, it has such a huge impact, but until you talk about it, a lot of people don't know. So working at the American Trauma Society, we are constantly working to shore up these systems of care, not on the clinical side. So clinical means how to like fix something. If your arm was broken or you had a major trauma, how I was going to fix you. We work on that whole like operational side. That is, that the surgeons, that these centers have the appropriately trained surgical personnel, nursing personnel, that they have a way to do performance improvement, which is how we're continuously doing our jobs better, that we have a way to record. We call them trauma registrars. There's cancer registrars, there's trauma registrars, there's tumor registrars. You're constantly collecting the data to feed that back into the system to figure out what ways we can make improvements on policies. And the other piece of this, that's really important, is that the American Trauma Society in particular is home to something called the Trauma Survivors Network. So we are a unique network that is focused on those that have had physical trauma and their families in managing the social and emotional wounds after trauma. There was a study done once and it was actually done, I believe it was out of Hopkins, where they looked at this group of patients that kept coming back to their doctors and they were saying, I'm still in pain. They weren't looking for pain medication. They were like, I'm still in pain. I can't, I've got to come back and see you. I'm uncomfortable. I'm not feeling well. And their surgeons were like, look, we have fixed everything we can. But what came to light is that the processing of like what happened to them in that car crash, or say in that fall, or maybe when they were shot, like whatever it might be, they had not been able to they didn't have the support services to process that. And also when you come out on the other side of trauma, you have there's a whole new life. Some people are able to return to 100% of where they were. Some people, are going to have to make an adjustment and set new goals for themselves because, they lost a limb. And I've done some work on this in the State House. Maybe they lost a limb because of their trauma, but they still want to ski. So they work with our survivor network to, set new goals and to work towards those new goals through, evidence-based processes like, peer visitation, being able to talk to trained people who've been there and understand what you've gone through, different community support groups. There's a whole host of services, and it is taken off in the last 5 years in an amazing way because the American College of Surgeons, which is like our mothership, the Committee on Trauma, has really identified this as being one of the most important contributions that we can make full circle. So those people who are coming back to their doctors and saying, I'm still in pain, we're dealing with, we've provided the structure to help them manage that so they can get back to their new normal as quickly and as comfortably as they can.
And this is one thing that's so great about New Hampshire, which is that, you get paid $100 a year to be a state senator, okay? But you have this whole other life where you're able to travel the country and learn these best practices and bring them back to the state and try to implement them here, right? You were talking about, you guys develop policies and you get to bring them and implement them here. So I think that's just so quintessential New Hampshire, right? And great.
Something that we did in New Hampshire I was really proud of. I mean, there's a few things trauma-wise, but I'll talk about the Stop the Bleed program. So bleeding, like hemorrhaging, can take someone's life in under 5 minutes.
Wow.
And the simple way to solve that problem, and any of us can do it, is put a tourniquet on. Think about the Boston Marathon.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, people took off their shirts, their belts, whatever. They made homemade tourniquets. Anybody who was transported to a Boston hospital survived. Okay? And a majority, if not all of them, had some type of like limb loss or serious bleeding where a homemade tourniquet was applied. And there had already been a move in the country to start going in this direction, recognizing that we could stop anybody, just like you see defibrillators everywhere.
Yeah.
Like when I first was an EMT, you had to have a special certification. No, anybody can use a defibrillator, an AED. Thank the Lord. Saves lives every day. Same thing with the tourniquets.
Yeah.
So the Stop the Bleed initiative, which was from the College of Surgeons, really started making its way around the country. So my first dip into this, because if you know anything about New Hampshire, policy making, is you try something, you dip your toe in the water and see if you can build on that. So I worked on a bill that passed maybe 2 years ago to put tourniquets in high traffic state-owned buildings. So DMVs, liquor stores, not just the State House, but if there were, and the Department of Safety worked with the Department of Administrative Services to look at where are the places where the most members of the public are going through, and let's make sure that wherever there's an AED, we put a tourniquet in there. So if you're around the State House or the LOB or a DMV and you see an AED box, look inside, you'll see a tourniquet there.
Yeah.
So everybody has a role, and that's something that we work on in the Trauma Society all of the time. So I was able to take that and bring it here, working with bringing prosthetics, activity-specific prosthetic devices. We started with children, and now there's a bill for adults, which Senator Gannon is running, and I'm helping him. But doing that work with limb loss through the Trauma Society nationwide. And not all limb loss is because of trauma, congenital defects, cancers. But what's the same is we're starting with children, is that they want to play soccer, they want to ski, they want to, they want to be out. This little boy that came in to testify in the House said, when I want to run, I just want to run. I don't want to have to think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we worked to make it a requirement that the private insurance carriers would cover at least one activity-specific prosthetic device for these kids so that they could play with their friends.
And that's so important too, because I think, anyone remembers either being a kid or you have kids, but sports.
I'm still a kid.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, we know.
and then there's Tom.
And then, yes, then there's Tom.
Kid for life. But how important sports is and physical activity. And sports can teach you so many things about good sportsmanship and being healthy. Like today, I was listening to testimony from the New Hampshire Soccer Association, and the executive director was talking about a kid who's part of their program who's an amputee, lost his leg, and how he is able to participate in a soccer program with other kids who are also amputees, and how empowering that is. So it's interesting that you say that. And also I think just the fact, I had no idea that trauma was so, I mean, obviously trauma is trauma, but you always hear about, heart disease as being like the number one killer. I had no idea that it was trauma.
Yeah, it's in the, there's like the top 5, but when you adjust it for age, it's trauma. And it's, what I always say, it's no disrespect to everybody worries about having a heart attack. They know a lot of people who have, who've had cancer. And these, we have systems that are really well-funded and focusing on those, but what's not well-funded and well-focused, it's really done by the goodness and the great, the generosity of like hospitals in our state and ambulance services is making sure, and this happens throughout the country, that we are, from the moment that car crash happens or that fall happens, there's a system that says, here's how we're going to get you from here to here, here's what we're going to do in the middle. And it has not had a lot of, systemic funding or philanthropy like the others have. And granted, again, respectfully, but this is what's taking lives.
So we've been talking about some serious stuff, which I think is really important, but I want to shift gears like a little bit. I want to get into your public service, but you and I both know a lot of firefighters. And
Yes, we do.
So they do some very serious stuff around trauma, but I mean, let's be honest, some of these are like the funniest people, that men and women, but they've seen some serious stuff, but they also have like the most incredible sense of humor. So you must have some amusing stories perhaps from that side.
Oh, well, I don't know if you know this, but my husband he was on the job for 30 years.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, he retired in the middle of the pandemic. So not so funny, because he went from, being out there every day to all of a sudden he's like home all of the time. So
Is he driving you crazy?
Oh, pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
But I drive him crazy too, because before the pandemic, and the Senate, I traveled. Like I lived 2 weeks out of the month in D.C. and 2 weeks out of the month I was at home, and he was at the fire department and like things. And then the pandemic came and he retired. And all of a sudden, everything stopped. You know, there's so, the thing about the funny stories and the way that we work, we talk to each other and we work with each other, all has to do with what goes on at the kitchen table. It's like is the way I think that most of us have managed our stresses and our concerns, things that were bothering us would kind of come out at that dinner table time where you could have a serious conversation, but you could flip it into something that would be humorous at the same time. So that is, you know, when I think of some of the funniest things that I've been involved in at any, you know, fire department or ambulance service I've worked at have involved, you know, the kitchen table. You know, I remember when we were in college, and this is when you could do these kinds of things. Now there's all these rules against it, but we were a bunch of college kids, and we wanted a Christmas tree, and everyone else went home for school break, and we were home back at the college answering ambulance calls. So we would take the ambulance and buy a Christmas tree and stuff it in the back of the ambulance, and then pull. You know, we have photos. There's evidence of us doing this. Now with all the infection control and such, Christmas trees do not go in ambulances. But that's the lighter side of it, and many of some of the funniest people that I know, I've met sitting at a kitchen table at a fire station, whether it's in New Hampshire, Vermont, or even someplace else in the country.
I thought Christmas trees were medicinal, but
Yeah, I think that's the pine.
the pine
Pine sol?
Yeah. They have like pine schnapps or something, right?
We used to eat ice cream. I don't know if you ever heard Ben and Jerry's has. They'd have the Vermonster. It would be this
Yeah.
so we would go get a Vermonster and get it. No, we wouldn't eat it in the ambulance, but we'd get it and we'd put it in the back and drive it back to quarters. You can't do that stuff anymore. I mean,
No.
things have changed.
But, you know, I think when you were talking about, you know, firefighters and obviously your work, it's very heavy, right? And so you need to relax. And so I'm curious, what does Senator Sue Prentiss do to relax? I know you might still CrossFit. And
I should, but I'm not.
You've done Tough Mudders.
I've done Spartan races. You
Yeah.
are correct.
And, you know, we all know that I'm a big fan of GTL.
GTL, Gym Tan Laundry.
Yeah. So what does Sue Prentiss do?
Wait, what's GTL? I'm sorry. What?
Gym Tan Laundry. It's from the Jersey Shore.
Okay.
You go to the gym.
Yeah.
You make sure you got your tan and you get your laundry done.
I mean, Tom's always got the tan.
It's a good weekend routine. But so what do you do for fun? I know you have your mom that you watch Jeopardy with nightly, which is also a favorite pastime of mine.
Does
But
she
what-
win, or like who gets the questions?
My mother and my husband in separate houses, and we live 6 houses apart. They both watch Jeopardy, so I sometimes will move between the places. But my mother easily, it's just like a slam dunk. Same with my husband; he loves it. It's great.
So do they prefer Alex or Ken, or Mayim?
Oh, Alex, my mother,
Yeah.
she can't get
Traditionalist.
over it. My husband's like whatever, but
Yeah.
my mother,
I like Alex too. But what else do you do for fun to relax, decompress?
I love to bake.
Really,
Ooh,
I
this
didn't know
is
that
the-
about you.
Yeah, I have a dream that someday I will have just like a little shop that are like brownies that's my go-to. I have this recipe, and I'm gonna brag and say I make really good brownies from scratch.
Yeah.
Oh,
You
from
can-
scratch.
Just
Your own
from scratch.
recipe?
Yes. And I've merged a few recipes to make it work, but you can ask pretty much any senator that's been there with me about my brownies, and they'll tell
Kind
you.
of offended.
because-
I've never
Yeah.
tried one.
Well, you got to go to the anteroom. You gotta-
I'm not
we're
allowed in there.
allowed in there.
Maybe for the launch of this particular podcast episode, we can do something at the State House with brownies.
I mean,
We could.
don't threaten me with a good time.
No, I have this idea or this dream that like my next chapter is a small shop where it just always smells like home. Brownies, cookies. I'm not good with cupcakes, and I'm okay with cakes. And I can do different layer bars, but that's my jam. That's what I do when I need to kind of unplug. And I'll always like take it somewhere. Sometimes I just do it to get it, because I want to do it, and then I'll put whatever it is in the freezer. But then if there's, I'm like, I'm going to make brownies. I'm going to bring it in for session this week, or I'm going to, when Phoebe was little, I was constantly sending things off to school, but that's where I kind of refined my craft. So some of it's just pure pleasure, some of it's for purpose, but not too far for me. And I think that this is like what I call it, kismet, not it is King Arthur flour.
Oh, I love King Arthur flour, like right across the border up in Vermont. I did a chronicle on them. Yeah, they're fabulous.
Bingo.
Yep.
And my mom and I will go there sometimes on the weekends. I like to just go there in general, and boy, has it changed. But we will go and shop, just like cruise around with our carts for a while, and then end up having lunch in that cafe. So that is what I do to like chill. I loved CrossFit. I loved all of that. I just have never been able to get back there. I should.
So I'll tell you, I love to cook, but baking is a real science. There's a science behind it. I just recently found out that you can mix something too much and it makes it dense.
Yeah.
Now, in my simple brain, I'm sitting there going, the more you mix it, the better. Everything's blended together. But there's a science to it, and that tracks with your line of work.
Exactly. Well, coincidentally, yes, I think that it does. Again, it makes me feel homey. There's a product that people enjoy. It makes them happy, and I feel like I've accomplished something. And so I just keep working. Like I feel like I've got brownies down. I've got cream cheese brownies down. I've got the 7-layer bars. I only make those at Christmas time.
Yeah.
And so I've been working peanut butter cookies. Like I've just get really good at one and then move on to another.
You're getting me so hungry now. This is like,
So hungry.
yeah. I so want a cookie right now.
Well, we can take care of that. I'll make sure.
So while the baking is fun, I do want to go back a little tiny bit because I'm curious, like, so you've done so much in the public realm, but then what made you want to run for office? Like, how did you get to that point where you're like, you know what, I'm going to actually run to be a state senator?
It started at Lebanon City Council. And it involves Burt Leonard, who was a city councilor in Lebanon for years, the smartest man I ever knew. He had a cigar. He was a retired fire captain. I ran into him at the fire academy, and he suggested that I run for city council because in the city of Lebanon, everywhere I'd lived, I could always volunteer for the ambulance. And I would have my job at Dartmouth, and I'd volunteer for the ambulance. But when we moved to Lebanon, they didn't have a volunteer ambulance that's managed by the fire department. They had volunteer firefighters, but I'm afraid of fire, so I didn't want to do that. And Burt Leonard walked by my office one day, a guy from Lebanon who was retiring as a city councilor, and he stopped. He said, you ought to run for the city council. Do something, help us make sure that public safety stays intact in the city. It was a conversation like that, and I was like, all right, well, it's volunteer work. I like policy. I like process. I like system thinking. So the first time I ran, I lost. I lost by 11 votes to the former, some of you might even remember her, and she passed away probably 3 years ago. Her name was Terry Dudley, and she was the mayor, and she was in the House of Representatives on Judiciary, and she was like, we have a bridge between Lebanon and West Lebanon that was named after her, because if you live in West Lebanon, you're always like trying to bring equity between West Lebanon and Cityside. And so I ran against Terry, not knowing she was going to run, and we became friends on election day, and we stayed friends. And then 2 years later, I ran again, and I won. And so I was on the city council for 12 years. And during that time, I was fortunate to serve as the mayor of the city. And then from there, I was literally I'm like, you know what? It's time for me to kind of make my way out of this work. I had done the Hoffman Haas Fellowship through the New Hampshire Center for Not-for-Profits because I thought my next, again, you're always thinking, well, for me, I'm thinking about my next kind of volunteer chapter. I'm like, I think I want to be on a not-for-profit board or volunteer in that world. So I was doing this stuff, and then I met Mayor Pete, and he really he reminded me of what's good in government, and how important potholes are. While we're worrying about all this other stuff, the neighbors want to make sure that the potholes are fixed and they can drive on their roads and that their kids can get to school. I don't know, it just gave me I was like, And then there was the pandemic, and the state senator for that district, District 5, retired, right in the middle of it. That's literally how it happened.
Oh, wow.
So, I got some phone calls from some people who said, gee, you should really think about this. And being at the time that we're in the middle of worldwide pandemic that when I was working at the Fire Academy, I was part of the team that developed the statewide response plan, that did the continuity of operations, like how you survive afterwards and get things going again. I was involved in all of that with people from safety and Homeland Security and Health and Human Services. I was like, maybe this is the right time to take that stuff and take it to the Senate. So I ran, and that's that. So this is like my new this is my volunteer thing that I do now.
That's the way the
It's a
cookie
big deal.
crumbles.
Exactly. But my cookies don't crumble. They just got to
They're
gently
moist.
break.
And, oh my gosh. So I've heard a rumor from some of the other female lawmakers, maybe Representative Spear, but she did allude to the fact, and maybe you can confirm or deny, that a lot of the female lawmakers, not to put my co-host on the spot, but they find him very attractive. So have you heard
Really?
any
Really, Tiffany?
yeah.
We're not
Like,
supposed to kiss and
yeah.
tell. I mean,
So-
come on.
Geez,
There you go.
thanks.
But, so he's turning. Tom does tan, but I think I see a little bit of pink on the cheeks there right now. Can you confirm or deny that might or might not be
You,
true?
you don't have to answer that question.
Or you can.
I will share that I was outside of a fundraiser in Manchester, waiting to go in, sitting in my car, talking on the phone with a former colleague of yours. And I didn't know that at the time. And you walked by, and I said, "Oh, there goes Tom Brazel." She goes, he's handsome.
Okay.
I said, and he dressed up as Captain America once.
That's
And
true.
so-
That is true.
There you go.
Couple superheroes, I guess, here in the studio. So I want to switch gears. Shocker. And last thing I want to talk about is Amazing Maisie. Because
love of my life.
when we first met back when you first were elected, we became fast friends. And I think part of that bond was our love of animals and our love of pups.
Yeah.
And I remember this. So this was probably back in 2022. And I remember you asked me to come into the office, and we were
So
talking.
upset.
And Maisie was on her last leg.
Yeah.
And I gave you some advice, mainly take a lot of pictures.
Yep.
But here we are.
And she
And
woke me
Amazing
up at 5
Maisie.
o'clock this morning. Yes.
Yep. So, I mean,
15
tell us
year-
about the Amazing Maisie.
So Maisie is a 15-year-old Yorkshire Terrier
Oh,
who has complex medical problems. We spend more money on her than we do on ourselves, and she just has had. Yorkshire Terriers are prone to things like problems with their liver and their pancreas. So we'd been through all of those, and then about in 2022, she just started. There was something that changed about the way that she was drinking water and eating. Something that happened in the middle of the night that was really alarming. And as we did the follow up on it, we thought things had settled out, they said, "Oh, I came home from the State House, and my husband said, 'All right, well, Maisie had her ultrasound today, and her abdomen's full of tumors, and she's really too old to be operated on, and so they think that they're cancerous. So we just have to prepare ourselves for what's going to happen.'" And I remember I texted you and said, it's cancer. She's going to pass away. And Tom just said, take a lot of pictures. Remember, every day with her is a good day. And so here we are. It's 2025, and she is. She barks all the time. She's like having a baby because she's up most of the night, but she's still, she's still hungry, and she still has this bright. She still has this shine in her eyes. And there was a medication that they had us give her that shrunk. It couldn't have been cancer. They think they're fatty tumors that shrunk whatever was in her abdomen, and she's just like going along. So we've made it to 15 years old.
That's
with the
incredible.
Amazing Maisie, yes.
Amazing Maisie.
we'll have to get a photo.
Yeah.
I've got him with her little gray face.
Aw.
Yeah, she is. She's losing a lot. We're noticing she's losing a lot of weight lately. And so, you just never know what's going to happen. So when I start to get a little irritated at the 6 a.m. barking for fresh chicken from the refrigerator, I'm like, I won't be giving her fresh chicken from the refrigerator at 6 a.m. for, forever. So just give it to her and be happy about it.
It's a great story. Well, Senator Sue Prentiss, it is such a pleasure to see you yet again in my career. so wonderful to cross paths with you over the years. And, can't tell you how much I really appreciate you coming in to be with, me and Tom on.
Anything but politics. And I've learned quite a bit about, I always knew what you did, right? And I always knew your background, but to hear the details has been really helpful and refreshing. And, you're an expert over there on a lot of these issues. So I really hope people listen and understand why you are an expert. And I also want a brownie.
Yeah, seriously. Or a cookie, but both.
I'm just going to point out that Valentine's Day is around the corner, and I was having this conversation with a.
Can we place orders?
Yeah.
Well,
will you be mine?
I was having this conversation with one of the policy folks from the Senate who enjoys these brownies, and I said, "Look, I have." I found it last night. My heart-shaped cookie cutter.
Yeah.
I can't make sugar cookies for my life. Like that is something I've never mastered. But I was like, I could make the brownies, and I could use the heart-shaped cookie cutter, and we could have heart-shaped brownies for Valentine's Day. So you never know what's going to come your way.
Well, I think we would be more than willing to try them out for you. Yeah.
I'm always available.
Yeah.
We'll take care of it.
Well, Senator, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure. And again, have known you've done tremendous things, but had no idea the depth and how vast your career and your experience is. So this was really educational and a lot of fun. And I really appreciate you sharing that with us. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator Sue Prentiss.
Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you, Tom. It's great to be here. And I appreciate the opportunity. I had a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Great.
What a
Thank
way
you.
to cap my day.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm Tiffany Eddy from Tiffany Eddy Media, joined by my co-host.
Tom Praisall from Demers, Praisall, and Thomas.
Demers, Praisall, and Thomas. That's right. Okay.
That's right.
Get that tea in there.
That's right.
Get the tea in there. And thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Anything But Politics. And we've got so many great shows coming up, so we will see you soon.